Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to MALN, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today, we are joined by Massachusetts House Representative Tram Nguyen, who was first elected in 2018 and re-elected in 2020. She was also recently named the House Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. Welcome to our show this week. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be a part of this, and I look forward to the conversation.
It's a pleasure. Absolutely. Me too. I was hoping we could start off if you can tell us a bit about your professional background and experience, along with any issues or policy work you've been really passionate about through your career.
Absolutely. So as mentioned, I was elected recently. Well, it seems recent, but it was back in 2018. I'm starting my second term. Prior to getting elected, I was a legal services attorney with Greater Boston Legal Services, representing survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, new immigrants, and other vulnerable clients. And in doing that work, not only did I represent them in the courtroom, I also worked on policy to better the lives of my clients and others in the Commonwealth. And in doing that work, I realized just how important it is to make sure that we elevate voices that are often not heard, and making sure that we take into consideration the lived experiences of people. And so in doing that work, I learned about the legislative process, and with the encouragement of colleagues, friends, and family, I decided to run for office in 2018 and proudly now represent the 18th Essex District, which includes the towns of Andover, Boxford, North Andover, and Tewksbury.
That's well said. That representation within politics is something we'll get into. It's very important. So I was wondering, in your experience and your opinion so far, what has been the pandemic's biggest impacts on the state legislature?
Well, we all have seen the devastating effects of the pandemic. What issues we saw before that, the pandemic has only exacerbated within this past year, 12 months. And so for us, issues like housing, transportation, environment, making sure that people know where to turn to for resources, making sure that we are not leaving anyone behind when we think of our policies and how it affects people on a daily basis. And for me, as someone who has represented vulnerable people, and I came here to the United States when I was 5 years old with my family as political refugees and grew up in Lawrence, and seeing how the immigrant community continue to struggle in terms of access to the resources, that has really been a priority of mine, to make sure that we look into the points of access and ensure that the information going out there are available in multiple languages and going through the channels that people in immigrant communities and other communities that are not often in the mainstream, that they get the information and that they get it from trusted sources.
Absolutely. That seems to be a topic we talk a lot on this series, really about outreach, accessibility, just sort of how to really make these resources, as you're saying, like also available to these people who really probably even need it more than the other populations. And so how does your team work adapt to working throughout the pandemic? Sort of what were your operations like and what are they currently like?
So I want folks to know that, a lot of folks, people, when they think about government, they assume that we have this big team. And for most of us representatives, we actually only have one staff member. So for me, I have one legislative director who's just phenomenal. And we divide and conquer, to be honest. A lot of issues have come in. As you can imagine, there have been many questions about the pandemic, whether it was testing or now with the vaccine rollout. But in addition to that, people are reaching out with real life issues such as unemployment, housing, and just other concerns that we can't predict ever. And so what we try to do is try to triage and have information and resources available so that we can point people in the right direction. But additionally, as state representatives, we do have access to certain departments in the state and could help work on the cases, but also accelerate the pace and get a quicker response. And that's what we've been trying to do these past 12 months to make sure that people know that someone is looking after their cases, that, we're hearing their problems, and that even if we cannot provide all the answers, we can at least point them in the right direction and get them the information in whatever language that they may need, that they might not even know exist.
Right, absolutely. That role itself is crucial. So switching topics a little bit, according to Stop AAPI, I Hate National Report, there have been about 3,808 incidents regarding the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And they were reported to that organization between March 2020 and February 21. So it's within almost a year, and about 100 reports were in Massachusetts. How can the government enhance the safety of marginalized communities? It's a broad question, but it's something that I imagine it's on everyone. I mean, consistently, it's a consistent topic, but right now it's something that's blaring, I think.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you're bringing up this topic. As we've all seen in the news, the mass murder that happened in Atlanta, Georgia, last Tuesday, the Tuesday of last week, really is a culmination of this increased hate and violence against Asians and Asian Americans. As an Asian American, as one of few AAPI elected officials, this has been top of mind for me. I have to say that the incident that happened in Georgia really was not a surprise. There's a long history of racism against Asians and Asian Americans throughout U.S. history. And we have seen this in whether it's the Chinese Exclusion Act or the internment camps, or the fact that Asian Americans couldn't even become citizens until 1952 before we could even vote. And so with that longstanding history, unfortunately, it has only gotten worse within the last 12 months since the start of coronavirus, when with the increased misinformation and scapegoating of the virus and the blaming of the virus entirely on China, it essentially has put a target on the backs of all Asian Americans or Asians living in this country. And that increase in hate and violence, we've seen studies, it has increased 150% within the last 12 months. And that's in cities like LA and New York, and unfortunately also here in Boston. And it has culminated in this mass murder that resulted in 8 deaths, 6 of whom are Asian women. And so we need to continue to speak out. We need to address this racism and hate. And I propose 3 things that we could do. One is I have a hate crimes bill that would essentially strengthen our hate crimes statute so that we could better increase accountability and make sure that we hold these perpetrators accountable for their heinous acts. Mm-hmm. But additionally, I don't think that criminalization is the only answer, because we need increased conversation and education. So I have another bill to promote racially and socially inclusive education through the K-12 school system, so that we can start having these conversations so that people can understand histories in a more inclusive way, better appreciate different cultures, different history, different backgrounds, and have an appreciation of humanity overall. And thirdly, I think we all need to stand in solidarity with one another as vulnerable communities, or communities of color, or communities of people with disabilities, and just other folks in these protected classes. We need to stand together to make a statement that such heinous violence and racism really should not exist in our community. It's not okay. It's never okay.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no tolerance at this point, and I think that's something that has grown, luckily, over the decades between communities of color. I think finally there's some sort of intersectionality is now identified and sort of talked about, and these connections are made more. And I was hoping to talk about that bill. Thank you for also bringing up the other one. I actually didn't read anything about that, so I'm excited to follow with it. We're almost running out of time, so I'm trying to get the biggest questions out of the way. In your opinion, what are a few essential steps, and this goes into what we're just talking about, what are a few essential steps the government could take or must take to improve and effectively foster racial and ethnic inclusion and diversity?
Well, we have to be intentional about the talking about intersectionality, as you mentioned. When we have to make sure that there are resources for people and that we create space for people to voice their stories and make sure that these stories are being amplified. And we need to also be intentional about what we are putting out there. Words matter, actions matter. So when we're talking about reporting, if it's a hate crime or if it's racism, we should call it as such and not to try to dance around it, right? Or if we see instances of hate and we see threatening, violent behaviors, we should have a mechanism to hold those perpetrators accountable, which is why I joined with the Attorney General and Senator Hines to file this hate crimes bill to make sure that we draw a fine line, that violent, threatening, destructive behaviors are not protected under the First Amendment, and empower communities to come forward to report these crimes. We know that there is a lot of fear in the community too, so we want to not only have these resources available, but work with community organizations and leaders so that they understand what is out there, so they could help their community members get access or even report these crimes. I tell people all the time that if you are too afraid to go to law enforcement, turn to someone who can and will do that to help protect you.
Well said. Thank you so much. Are there any possible resources for residents of color possibly facing some types of discrimination that you would recommend?
Certainly, there is a 1-800 number available through the Attorney General's office, but we also have a Massachusetts office for victims assistance that a lot of people may not know about, and they have a lot of resources to assist victims and their families as they deal with these traumatizing experiences. And we hope that people will reach out to their own representatives and senators and make sure that that they build that relationship and make sure that they continue to join other communities in speaking out. Being a silent bystander is no longer an option.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Are there any other news, events, reminders that you'd like to share with our audience before we go?
Absolutely. So tonight there is actually a town hall to address anti-Asian racism. It's a virtual event that starts at 6 o'clock, and I can certainly share the information with you after this. But I'm thrilled to see that there are over 1,000 people signed up for this virtual town hall, and that dozens of Asian and AAPI organizations have come together to put this event together. And I hope it's not the last one. This is an ongoing conversation, and we hope to be able to continue to support such discussions.
Okay, beautiful. Do you know there will be a recording of it by any chance?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay, that'll be available too. And I was just going to ask, if there are upcoming others in the future, how could residents stay involved, get in touch with your team, you and your team?
Oh, certainly. Please reach out to us anytime. You can search for me on both the legislature's website, but I also have my own website, votetram.com, votetram.com. We want to hear from you. And if you are supportive, please reach out. This is very early on in the legislative session, so the bill has just been filed and it will be assigned a hearing date. And if you are supportive, please send in testimony. Please share your stories so that we can share those stories to move this bill forward.
Thank you. I'm excited to put all these resources and this information along with the recorded video and the web doc below this episode. Thank you so much for talking with us, Commissioner. And Commissioner, thank you so much for talking with us, Representative, and for being our guest on MALN Opinion Plus tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you. Take care. Everyone, please tune in for another episode next week. Follow us on Twitter at MALN, at MA Latino News, and Instagram at MA_Latino News. I'm Belen Dumont with MALN Opinion Plus, and I will see you all next time.